In this Jaeger North webinar on customer acquisition for tech companies, you'll hear from two expert speakers. Mark Jaeger is a partner and chief strategy officer for Jaeger North Integrated Marketing, a company that creates customer acquisition and enablement programs for leading tech companies such as NetApp, Hitachi, and VMware. Jim Dickey is a managing partner with CSO Insights, a research firm that specializes in benchmarking companies' marketing practices. Jim has more than 29 years of sales and marketing management experience and has authored several books on sales and marketing. He's also a contributing editor for CRM Magazine, CRM Guru, and Harvard Business Review. We wanted to give you the highest quality presentation possible, so I want you to know that we pre-recorded Mark and Jim's main talk, but they're here with me right now, and they'll be watching your questions come in during the presentation, and they'll be answering you live on the air. So I want to prove that. Mark, can you prove you're really here by saying hello quickly?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Okay, great. And Jim, let's open up your microphone as well.
Yes, I'm here in Boulder, Colorado. Another beautiful sunny day.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Well, you gentlemen get ready to review the questions from our attendees, and let's get into the meat of the presentation. So, Mark, take it away.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks for joining me, Jim. I know you're as excited as I am to be talking about such a relevant topic that I'm sure most companies are struggling with. How do we significantly improve our efforts when it comes to new customer acquisition? In the technology world in particular, we deal with so much competition for our target audience's mindshare that we need to be strategic and tenacious about how we engage with potential buyers. So Jim, from your perspective and from what the research at CSO tells us, why would you say this is such a timely topic?
Well, I think, Mark, we're seeing it happen on both the marketing side and the sales side. It's all about growth. It's all about going out and finding new customers. As part of our 2013 lead management optimization study, when we surveyed marketing and we said, what are your top objectives, 83.8% came back and said it's all about going and getting new logos, new clients. That also jives with what we found in the sales performance optimization study where we surveyed 1,100 sales organizations earlier this year. Finding new clients was listed as the top objective by 65% of those firms. And I think it's even going to get more important next year in 2014 because we're already hearing Wall Street come back and say next year we're going to have companies show us growth. It can't just be the major number by cost cutting. You've actually got to go out and show top-line growth. But when we take a look at marketing organizations and we talk to them, we say, okay, everybody knows that we need to focus on this. Only 5.8% of the companies that we surveyed said that this was one of their core competencies. So we have a dilemma here of got to make it happen and don't really do it great all the time. So how do we get that more in balance?
Even though these are 2013 figures, I'll bet that you would have found very similar results for the last several years. Even with all the tools and technologies available to us, many of the underlying challenges have remained unchanged. So let's get right into it. What we're talking about today is a perspective that I think will help technology marketers prioritize how we go about getting new customers. I call it the 5 critical truths for acquiring new customers as a technology company. Now, by no means would I say this discussion will solve all of your problems, but my hope is that we give you a new way to think about how to prioritize the activities your company uses to bring on new buyers. So let's start with a simple construct that we can build off of. There are 3 stages that happen most of the time when you're doing customer acquisition with an outbound effort. Let's call them outreach, nurturing, and sales readiness. Now, outreach can be defined as the activity that marketing engages in to bring new buyers into a conversation with your company. Nurturing is when you qualify the suspect into something that's ready to turn over to sales. And sales readiness is when the lead is ready to engage with the sales team in a potential buying conversation. You have to respect that each of these 3 stages happen, but you can minimize the effort required for any of these 3 by being more efficient with any one of them. I'll get into that a little more in a minute, but first let me use an example about how these 3 stages work from my friend Adele Ravella, who has a great analogy for this. No one is overwhelmingly successful in getting dates by walking up to strangers and asking for one, at least not dates that most of us would like to have. The same is true in lead generation and customer acquisition. You're going to strike out 1,000 times more often if you go out to the market asking for a date, or in other words, a sale, from the first communication than if you warm up your audience first by providing a relevant, softer request, at least until they know who you are. Now, that being said, you can hedge your bet on this. If you went to a place where you knew people were looking for dates and presented them with attributes you knew they were looking for, of course your chances will increase greatly. And in customer acquisition, if you do a very good job of qualifying your targets before you do your outreach, you will significantly decrease the amount of further qualification you need to do in nurturing and potentially reduce the amount of time required in the sales readiness phase. The same is true of the other two phases. The better you do in each aspect, the less you need of the other two. But let me talk about the bigger problem for a minute. You know, the biggest issue that anyone has in this paradigm isn't understanding that these three phases exist. The challenge almost always comes into play when an exchange happens between marketing and sales. And I'm usually not referring to the exchange between outreach to nurturing to sales readiness, because depending on who owns the nurturing process, it's handled in different ways. I think you will most commonly find that when the marketing group is handling nurturing, they deploy technology to do the nurturing for them using systems like Eloqua or Marketo. If sales owns the nurturing process, they tend to deploy people to solve the problem using lead qualifiers that are also called SLQs or business development. Either way, the exchange problem happens at the point when anything is moved from marketing to sales. This is the most common reason we see breakdowns in customer acquisition and a heavy influencer in why there are only a limited number of leads that ever make it into closed sales. Jim, from your most recent research, what kinds of numbers do you see in terms of leads that make it to sales and the types of exchanges that are the most successful?
Well, we explored that in detail in our study, Mark, and we went out and started talking to the companies about what they were doing with the leads as they came in. And a lot of those go through a scoring process, then they go through a nurturing process to really decide if they're sales ready. But from our latest data, 37.8% of the leads end up going from that nurturing process to the sales organization. So, you're generating a lot of leads. Not all of them go to sales, but we found something interesting. If the ones that aren't ready yet for sales are continued to be nurtured, 23.7% of the companies we surveyed said that they see a significant number of those leads end up converting to opportunities. So I can't underscore enough the importance of nurturing. But you also brought up an interesting point, Mark, on who's doing the nurturing. When we went out and surveyed the companies, we found that there are really 5 different approaches. The one that we don't advocate at all is the 10.5% of the companies who said no one's responsible for nurturing because it should be done. It definitely has a payback. But some of the time, 26% is just handled by sales. 41, 42% of the time, it's handled by marketing, either an informal or formal process. And by the way, we advocate formal processes. But it's this 21% where it's a blended approach that we found the best results, where sales is able to take a look at some of the leads and say, hey, this is somebody I'm in contact with on a regular basis. They're not ready to start a new evaluation yet, but let me work this one. I'm constantly talking to these guys anyway, and then passing on the rest of them back to marketing so that they can make sure that they are being touched on a regular basis. And again, we're seeing that can have a significant increase in the number of leads that actually convert to opportunities, and opportunities then end up in the win column.
So let's break down some of the seemingly endless debates that happen between marketing and sales by getting to truth number 2. Aligning sales and marketing is mission critical. Marketing is in a tough spot because they think and act differently than sales. Jim, what kind of grades does marketing give itself in terms of how it supports sales?
Well, that's interesting, Mark, that we did go as part of the study and ask sales, say, hey, if we were to talk to your marketing organization and we were to ask them how they would grade you, what would you think? So these were the numbers that we got from marketing in terms of their own self-grading assessment. And as you can see here, they're pretty realistic in that they realize they need improvement in a lot of areas. The quantity of leads they're generating still needs to be improved. So does the quality of those leads, the effectiveness of the website. It's not a core competency where you see a lot of companies saying, hey, we exceed expectations at doing this. But interestingly enough, these numbers were actually lower than the grades that sales gave marketing. So I think in some cases, marketing is being a little hard on themselves, but clearly this shows that there's room for improvement.
From our perspective, the first part of solving this problem is to understand that an operational alignment is required for sales and marketing, such that the two entities should share common definitions and understand their roles and responsibilities as it relates to customer acquisition. Ask any 5 people in marketing what a real lead is, and then ask 5 people in sales. You might think you'd get 2 different answers, but commonly you will get 10. And this is why you get such confusion and sometimes arguments about which group isn't doing their part in overall sales and marketing. In our work with technology companies, we try to define the criteria for a qualified lead into as simple and measurable ways as possible. For example, the lead can clearly articulate a problem. They're part of a decision-making unit. They have an impending event driving them to fix their problem. They have money, and they're willing to spend it to solve the problem, and our product or service solves their problem. If a lead has 4 or 5 of these characteristics, it can be considered a hot or an A lead, and it can be put right into sales readiness. If the lead has 3 of these attributes, it's a warm or a B lead and may or may not be sales ready. If a lead has 2 or less, it should be put back into a nurturing cycle until it reaches 3 or more. From our experience, these are the types of operational definitions that need to be in place and managed to so that a sales and marketing engine can work. But the bigger issue to understand is why you need these rules in place, and it gets to the fundamental difference in the way that sales and marketing works. Marketing is driven and rewarded by efficiency. They want to get the biggest impact for their effort and dollars as they possibly can. Return on investment, or what sometimes more accurately is described as return on volume, is a key metric for them. Sales is driven and rewarded by effectiveness. They either hit quota or they don't. And this can create a huge rift between the two that usually manifests itself in their arguments about customer acquisition, which brings us to how Truth 1 and Truth 2 come together. For years, we as marketers have embraced a more equals better attitude as it relates to lead generation because we're aware of the funnel we talked about in Truth number 1. And it seems simple. If we want more to come out of the end of the funnel, we need to put more in the top, and that will make everything better. So we put all of our effort, our energy, and budget into creating more types of leads, more people that come to our webinars, more people that download our white papers, and all of these will filter through our magic funnel and end up as more sales. But what really happens when our focus is strictly on getting more into the funnel? Well, we often win at our goal, but we lose in the process. Our funnel becomes clogged with some leads that are real and many that aren't. And in the complexity of sorting through the good and the bad, the good are often stuck, stalled, or lost in the qualification process. Meanwhile, there are so many more that are bad versus good, everyone begins to believe that the overwhelming majority of leads are poor, and the perception spreads like poison. Until this starts to happen, where marketing is saying that sales never follows up on the leads we give them, or what happens to the ones that we've given them already. And sales says, well, the leads we're getting aren't real, and why are we talking to people or calling people that aren't interested in buying our stuff? I'm sure you've heard some of these comments before, and you're not alone. Most companies deal with this very issue every day. What I'm proposing is simply this. Most of this conflict is fixed by focusing on creating better instead of more. The better we do as marketers to qualify our audience before we do our outreach, the more targeted we are. The better investments we make in the communication message and vehicle we use to reach these people, the more results we'll see. It's certainly a balancing act to make this work, but the end result in almost every case is that better delivers more. Jim, I know this is something you advise your clients. How do you describe this?
Well, Mark, what we encourage companies to do is go through an exercise of developing their perfect prospect profile. What do I mean by that? Well, if you take a look at any bell-shaped curve of any population of anything, what you find is there are certain parts of the population that are more likely to do something or less likely to do something. In the case of our prospects, there are certain customers out there that are more likely to buy versus less likely to buy. So what we need to do is go through and analyze our past wins, losses, no decisions, say, can we learn anything from this? Are there certain industries we're more effective in than others? Are there certain stakeholders we engage more effectively than others? Are there certain competitors that we're more effective at winning against than others? And if we go through that process with the sales organization, looking at real metrics from our past deals in CRM, what we'll find is not only the people who are more likely to buy, but very likely to buy. And if marketing is armed with that kind of knowledge, they can develop much more effective marketing campaigns.
I think this concept of hedging your bet when it comes to customer acquisition is a good segue to talking about the fourth truth. This sort of stuff is often thought of as both an art and a science. But if you want to take a purely prescriptive scientific approach to diagnose where you may be off in your efforts, There are 9 specific ingredients to create the right mix for success.
As part of our lead management optimization study, when we looked at companies who were really excelling in their lead generation efforts, we found that there were 9 attributes about their programs. Started off first with the right alignment. They'd actually sat down with marketing and sales in the same room and said, what are we trying to accomplish? What does a great prospect look like? What are our service level agreements, et cetera, to make sure everybody was on the same page. Then they said, okay, well, let's focus on the right prospects. What are the attributes of companies we should go after? Based on defining those, they said, what are the right messages we should take that will go get those people's interest and show them that we really know who they are and we have solutions for the problems they're finding. Then it's all about the right campaigns, deciding should this person be approached via social marketing, should it be email marketing, should it be direct marketing, developing the right way to touch that person. Also making sure you have the right technology platforms in place. You've already mentioned Mark Eloquent, Marketo as being systems that can really help us not only execute campaigns, but track them all the way through. And then another best practice was lead scoring, going in and doing that analysis to decide, is this a marketing-ready lead or is it far enough along that it's a sales-ready lead? And then turn those over to sales and give them the help to go and actually convert those leads into real opportunities. And if they're not ready for converting, it's doing that nurturing. It's going through and continuing to make that person aware of you and keeping yourself top of mind so when they are ready, you're there to start engaging them again. And then finally, it's all about right engagement, having the tools in place provided by marketing to go out and actually execute the sales process. And if you think about that too, we live in kind of a frail ecosystem, so there's almost a 10th right, which is the right evolution. We should be constantly look at the metrics that come out of our marketing systems and our sales systems, see what the lessons to be learned are, and go and tweak our processes so that we're constantly responding to the marketplace as it is today, not how it was 6 months ago.
We've talked about the funnel and the different components that support building a lead generation engine, but the last truth deals with sales tools. Because of our misaligned orientation of marketing trying to be efficient and sales trying to be effective, we often end up with bad tools. When it comes to creating sales tools, marketing's role is to keep the list of stuff that needs to be developed. In many organizations, their job is to develop the collateral, but their responsibility ends when they get to cross each tool off their list, not when it proves to be effective. And because sales isn't responsible for marketing's efficiency, they just continue to ask for more tools to support each individual sales need. The result can be extremely costly in terms of time and money invested in these tools that are often never used. Many reports show the average company now spends over $43,000 on marketing content and sales tools per salesperson per year. Some other reports are now showing that 90% of marketing deliverables are not used by sales, and a different report shows that salespeople consider up to 90% of marketing collateral useless. So Jim, what does CSO Insights report about sales tools?
Mark, we did a separate mini-study on sales engagement optimization in terms of how salespeople are actually engaging customers in terms of direct calls, telesales calls, or following up after a call. What we found pretty interesting was that, there's a lot of content that's developed and delivered to them by marketing, but sales generates a lot of their own materials as well. In fact, 52% of all the sales tools that reps reported using were things that were generated by the sales force. So the first thing that told us is there are a lot of assets out there that marketing ought to have a process in place to go out, bring in, review, and then if they're good, share with the rest of the sales organization so they don't have to keep making everything themselves. They can leverage things they've already improved to work by other salespeople. But the other thing is keeping things up to date. We live in a very frail ecosystem, and so a reference that works today may not work tomorrow, or a competitive edge today that we use in our messaging may not work tomorrow. So we constantly have to be looking at how effective are the sales tools when we're out there using them in the field. And the problem we found was only 9% of the companies we surveyed said they have an automated process for getting that feedback back to marketing so they can make the course corrections to make sure that the tools being used in sales today are relevant and timely and accurate.
Thanks, Jim. I have to agree that collaboration between sales and marketing is so important in developing sales tools. If we ask either of these groups to develop tools completely by themselves, they tend to go to their comfort areas. Marketing tends to want to create high-level communications that cover the benefits to many audiences, while sales wants to create the specific communication that's going to fix their issue for the deal they're working on that day or that week. In our practice, we find the best types of tools you can develop are somewhere in between. Here's why. Most sales tools, such as collateral or product overview slicks, are designed and messaged to cover a variety of decision makers. Unfortunately, they tend to be given directly to a main decision maker who's part of a decision-making process. And he uses these communications to collect as much information as he can about your product and service, and then to present a case internally to other peers about what they should buy, your product or someone else's. Now, unfortunately, in many cases, these tools don't speak to the very specific needs of each of the people that are going to be involved and have influence on whether or not you get a sale. They tend to speak in vague terms about things like scale or flexibility or robustness, or in other trite terms that don't have much meaning to each specific person in the buying process. So they don't really support your internal champion's effort to help sell your product. I think we all know that every persona involved in a buying process has a different set of criteria that needs to be met in order for them to happily agree to you getting the sale. And importantly, they need to hear their specific message at different parts of the sales process and often in different mediums. For instance, a video case study might be the most effective tool for a COO to understand how easy your product is to implement, but maybe an ROI calculator is the best tool for a CFO to get a sense of how quickly an investment in your product will make an impact. In our practice, we recommend developing what we call synchronized sales tools. These are tools that have the specific purpose of enabling our internal champion to promote your product or service to each of their audience in the appropriate way. The dual benefit of these tools, besides the fact that they actually get used, is that you give your champion the ability to speak the benefits of your product in the message and medium that will get results. But you're also helping your internal champion do their job, and as a salesperson, you actually become that highly sought-after, trusted advisor in your buyer's decision process. We covered a lot of ground here today, so let's go back and hit the high points. But I do want to let everyone know that we have a link to the recorded version of this presentation that I'll share with you at the end of the webinar, in case you want to share any of these ideas with your peers. Let's recap some of the truths before we take some questions. First, customer acquisition has a life cycle of 3 phases we must respect: outreach, nurturing, and sales readiness. But you can minimize or almost eliminate the effort required for any of these 3 by being more efficient with any one of them. And the area where most problems in this life cycle happen are within the exchange between marketing and sales. This is why truth number 2 is so important. Aligning sales and marketing is mission critical, especially as it relates to creating an operational alignment between sales and marketing so they share common definitions about things such as what leads are, and that each understands their roles and responsibilities as it relates to customer acquisition. Truth 3. Contrary to what we learned when we were kids, more isn't always better. And in the context of customer acquisition efforts, better will deliver more. Better targeting, better messaging, better communication vehicles will almost always deliver more value. Truth 4. Don't forget that if you need to take a prescriptive approach to where you might be breaking down in your customer acquisition process, there are 9 key areas to look at: alignment, prospects, messaging, campaign, technology, scoring, conversion, nurturing, engagement. And finally, truth 5. You put so much time and energy to create leads that can make it into a sales cycle. Don't stumble on the 5-yard line when you're running for the touchdown. Give the sales team the tools they need to effectively overcome the common hurdles they're going to encounter as part of a buying process. And specifically, I would challenge you to create tools that address the specific buying criteria of the entire decision-making unit. So let's answer a few questions, but first I want to thank you for attending, and I hope that you'll walk away with some different perspectives that you can use when you think about your approach to acquiring customers and how you might reprioritize those efforts. I'd also like to thank Jim Dickey for bringing his valuable perspective, the great research that CSO Insight produces, and for being a good partner with Jaeger North, and Ken Millay for his support on the webcast. With that, I'll turn it over to Ken for some instructions on how we're going to run Q&A today.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. We are ready to answer some of the questions that have been coming in. Jim, I have a question for you from Ava, who asks, who needs to be involved in discussions to optimize lead generation alignment?
Well, Eva, that's a good question because, typically we're going to think, okay, we need to get sales and marketing in the room and they can hammer the thing out. One of the things that came out of our sales performance optimization study, though, was the role that service can play in lead generation. We're seeing a lot more companies that are realizing that, hey, I've got a group over here that's actually talking to customers. They're doing it every day. Why don't we stop taking the focus off of saying how fast can you get their issue resolved and get off the phone and on to the next service call, and instead say, well, wait a minute, could you ask this person about other things? Could you give us a referral to some other person that you know? Are there other things that we should know about for maybe cross-sell, upsell opportunities? So I think definitely getting the service organization involved in this process and utilizing them to help identify new leads is a source that's untapped by a lot of companies.
Okay, Mark, let me bring you back in. Here's a question from Dell, who says, what process do you use to develop sales tools?
Companies do this in kind of different ways. I'll tell you how we do it. We do something we call process mapping, which is where we work with the sales team to figure out exactly who they see as being involved in each part of the sales process in terms of who is that decision-making unit. And then from there, once we've diagrammed that, we do what we call win-loss analysis against that, where we talk to actual buyers who have been through the buying process that either came out on the other end as being a customer or didn't. And we try to figure out where the common fall-down areas are. And that's when we go and we build tools that address those issues. And usually what we'll do is we try to take an approach at looking at what tools are available and making recommendations on the ones that are going to work the best or new ones that need to be developed. And that's kind of how we go at that.
Okay, thanks. Jim, let me come back to you. I think this was in your area. It's a question from Marcus, who asks, what are the best sources of leads?
Well, it's interesting. As part of our lead generation study, we did have Marcus ask people to tell us what types of programs that they're using. Are you moving away from the old traditional things of direct mail and maybe telemarketing into more advanced things like webinars like this or email marketing? And we're really finding it's a combination of things. And what we really heard back from the companies that had the best results were that they were taking a look to go out to the constituencies they were marketing to and say, how do these people want to be touched? Some of these people want to be that high-tech touch where, it's just convenient for me. I want to get an email. I want to get a link to a website. I want to be able to download a video. Or were the people that want to do that high touch? So I think it's really going back and taking a look at the results you're generating from your marketing efforts, but also break it down by different types of stakeholders. What do executives want to see from you versus maybe the guys who are down in the trenches, and really understand that today it's not what marketing approach, it's what marketing approach is, and we've got to be constantly analyzing what's working today and double down on that and move away from the things that are stopping the work.
Okay. Mark, this question came in when you were talking about developing sales tools, and it's from Kartik, who asks what tools you recommend for effective lead generation.
Well, if I'm talking about approaches to lead generation, which is a little bit different than the tools, there's no one type of effort that's going to work better than another. It really is more about a blend. But more importantly, the thing you have to focus on is how do your buyers consume information? And if you start with understanding the problems that you solve for your buyers, and then from there you understand the ways that they want to hear from you, that's what you should build your strategy around. And that's what's going to be most effective for you. There's no one set approach that's going to work best for everyone. It's really more about how your audience needs to hear from you, what they need to hear from you, and then executing that in a way that's smart. And I think that's really the key.
Okay, well, I've got you on the line. I'm also going to bring in this question from Terry. When you were summarizing the 9 different ways to diagnose what's going wrong with lead gen, where do you start?
This is kind of a good follow-up question Wes just talking about. One of the things that I see is a fundamental problem when people are thinking that their lead generation engine isn't working. A lot of times, the most common problem is that there's some kind of misalignment between sales and marketing in terms of what we were talking about before, that operational definition of when marketing gives that lead over to sales. But the fundamental problem is more about alignment to your buyer. That's where most problems start. So that's the place you want to look first. What problems are we solving for that buyer, and are we sure that we're communicating our value in a way that's going to resonate with them? If you start there, that's a good place to get the biggest impact. And I know Jim has a perspective on this too. Jim, how would you answer that question?
Well, when I was listening to the question in your answer, Mark, two things came to mind. One of which is I think marketing needs to understand that they don't need to be all things to all people, because that's impossible. So it's really focusing on, okay, well, who are the important people I can be all things to? And we're just seeing more work being done by marketing to do what I'm calling peer group analysis. We had an opportunity to go in and benchmark a medical products company, and they said, let's go take a look at our past successes and failures and see what we can learn from some of those things. So they started understanding what the average cardiologist orders from them. They understood, what the uses were of those things. So based on kind of analyzing that helped them get really targeted on, hey, we're really great with cardiologists versus internists versus general practitioners. Let's go focus on those doctors first versus everybody else. And by the way, let's go focus on these problems first. But I want to add one other thing that just kind of popped in mind is that I think marketing is focused on lead generation. Let's do all the things we can do to generate leads. And sales is focused on opportunity management. Let's take those opportunities and actually close them. But there's a step in between that I think companies ought to make sure that is covered, is who's in charge of opportunity conversion? Who's going to actually go in and make that lead that you've generated an opportunity? And sometimes, that can be sales, sometimes it can be marketing. But when you've got that misalignment and people don't understand that here's who's going to do it, and by the way, here are the tools to do it, that's where we're really seeing a deterioration in the number of qualified leads actually turning into opportunities, because we're forgetting that we've got to go through that step the right way. Otherwise, it's going to be a wasted effort, and we're going to see what perceives to be a low return on investment on lead generation when it was actually an execution issue.
Okay, well, I'm going to follow right on that since you mentioned lead qualification. Going to do an instant question here. Ashwini just wrote in, to what extent should marketing qualify a lead for sales? Should marketing have a direct conversation with the prospect before passing it to sales?
I think we're seeing a number of different approaches, because we did get into that whole thing of, how do you decide if a lead is marketing ready, meaning that we should, keep this person or this contact in the database and continue to work with them, to when is it really sales ready? And we're seeing kind of a variety of approaches. And this, again, is why you need to get sales and marketing sitting in a room together and agree on what's the process, what are service level agreements, et cetera. Because we were with an insurance company where they said if a lead comes in and it's from one of our existing major accounts, we want to pass that directly to the salesperson. They're already working with an Aon Insurance or a GE or an IBM. Let them handle it because they've already got relationships with that account. Conversely, if it's for a brand new account, don't know anything about that company, don't want to waste the sales time, people's time until we know. So I think it's going to be something that you're going to customize for your own corporation based on what we're seeing. But it's having that dialogue and making sure that nothing drops through the cracks and that it's handled the right way and that everybody understands what the process was going into it and what their roles and responsibilities are.
Okay. Mark, let me bring you back to answer a question from Eric, who asked, what tools are you using to get feedback on which collateral marketing is created is most effective?
Well, typically the way we do this is we have a review meeting with marketing and sales that goes back and provides that closed-end feedback with which tools are getting used and which ones aren't. Again, as Jim was speaking to before, one of the things that breaks down the barriers between marketing and sales is just realizing we're all in this for the same purpose. The purpose is to drive revenue, right? So marketing can take offense to the notion that collateral that they've developed may not be getting used. But at the end of the day, it's about the end goal of being able to sell through to the customer. So, having that open conversation with sales and marketing together that once every week or 2 weeks on what's working, what's not working, that's a big, big help in terms of making the two groups work together well.
Okay, I think we've got one more measurement question here stacked up, and this one I'm going to throw at Jim. It comes from Darlene, and she's asking, how do you measure the ROI of lead generation campaigns?
I think that we're getting very simplistic about ROI, mainly because of the tools that we're using. As part of our lead generation study, we asked people, what are you actually using to manage campaigns? And still see a lot of companies say, well, we're dumping them into spreadsheets, or we're using the base capabilities in our CRM system. And I think you're going to really, in order to understand the full ROI, have a system like Marketo or Eloqua or Pardot or whatever, and integrate that into your CRM system. Because, for example, you may find that for your first order and going out and getting a new account, you look at the size of that order, they're typically smaller than you would get from an existing customer who already has a relationship with you. You might have discounted it a little bit more than that, so it may not look as attractive margin-wise. You may say, hey, the leads coming in from this source for new accounts, they're not that great. What I really want to be able to do is analyze what's the lifetime value of that customer. And if all of a sudden the first year they're okay, but the second year they explode in terms of their performance with us, I've got to be able to track those types of things. I just don't know how you're going to do those types of things, really gauge the full value you've received from your marketing programs by using spreadsheets. I think we're going to have to go with much more sophisticated analytic systems in order to assess that ROI.
All right. Well, I think we managed to make it through all of the questions that had come in during the course of the presentation. So let me thank all of our attendees for coming in with their interest and participation in the question set. And a big thank you to Mark Yeager of Yeager North and Jim Dickey of CSO Insights. That concludes our session. We look forward to seeing you on future marketing, information, and best practices webinars. Thank you so much. Good day.